Hi guys, I'm live. How you guys doing? I just want to spout off about music theory a little bit today. Just something on my mind about music theory. Maybe you could join me if you want. So I want to talk about sharps and flats when it comes to modes and altered scales, such as harmonic minor, harmonic major, and melodic minor. Those are all actually unnatural scales because they all involve an alteration of the basic C major scale. It's actually the most Western consonants that we have. So first I want to talk about, there's going to be two directions of sharps and flats for scales that I'm going to talk about. One is the sharp direction and one is the flat direction. The sharp direction involves taking minor modes and making them sharper, and then making altered scales out of that. The flat direction involves taking major scales and making them flatter, and using those alterations for altered scales as well. So to start with, I'm going to go to the sharp stuff. So I'm going to start with minors and sharpen them, and talk about how these create scales and interesting things. So let's start with an A minor scale, A natural minor scale. All white keys starting on A. The first thing you can do to change it to sharp is to raise the sixth. You can raise the sixth. So that would be F would go from F to F sharp. Now you automatically have a Dorian mode. Now that doesn't create anything unnatural. That's just a key shift around the circle of fifths by 1 degree. But the next sharp you can do from there, from the sixth, is sharp the third to make it an A Mixolydian mode. Now to do that you have to have a C sharp and an F sharp. But what if I take the F sharp out of it and just have a C sharp? Well, now I have an Aeolian dominant mode. It's basically it's the fifth mode of D melodic minor. So and it's also sometimes called the Hindu scale. It could even be considered a melodic major scale, but we don't usually call it that. So, by sharpening just the third in A minor to C sharp, I get an interesting scale that's a relative, or actually a mode of the melodic minor scale. So that's interesting. Now I'm going to raise one more note. After raising the third, I can raise the seventh. Now, if I were to raise the sixth, the third, and the seventh, I would have an A Ionian mode, or A major scale. But what if I just take the last alteration, the seventh, which is G sharp, and make that in the A Aeolian mode? From there, I have an A harmonic minor scale. So the A harmonic minor scale is just basically 3 directions along the circle of fifths sharp to Ionian, but then only take the last sharp that you do. So if you have just G sharp starting in Aeolian, you have A harmonic minor. That's interesting to me. Now I'm going to take another sharp. Beyond the seventh, you can sharp the fourth. Now I would have an A Lydian mode if I sharp the sixth, the third, the seventh, and the fourth. But what if I sharp just the fourth? Well, the fourth in A is D, so if I would have a D sharp. So I would have a scale that has an alien mode with a sharp 4. But the problem with that scale is a D sharp gives us a diminished third, or 2 half steps in a row, because D sharp E F, D sharp to E to F is 2 half steps consecutively, which makes D sharp to F a diminished third, and we don't tolerate that in consonant Western music. So we find out that if we sharp the 4 of an alien mode, you don't get anything usable. You go too far. You go 4 directions sharp-wise along the circle of fifths, and that last alteration there doesn't make a consonant scale because it has 2 half steps in a row or a diminished third. What if I go even further than that, and instead of having an A with raised fourth, what if I make the A into a Phrygian mode, which means I'm going to be making even more of a sharp if I go from A Phrygian mode to A Lydian mode. That's 5 steps around the circle of the fifths in the sharp direction. That's just that. So I'm going to flat the second of the A to make it A Phrygian, but then I'm also going to include the D sharp, which makes it from A Phrygian to A Lydian. That would take 5 sharps, and the last sharp you would have, since now I'm going to talk about it as if I were in E, because E is the Phrygian mode of the white keys. So now I'm going to say I'm in E Phrygian, and I'm going to go from E Phrygian to E Lydian. Now that would take 5 sharps, and the last sharp would be E F G A sharp. And if you add the A sharp to E Phrygian, you don't get anything useful. Why? Because from A sharp to B to C is also 2 half steps in a row, or a diminished third between G sharp, G sharp. E F G. I mean A sharp, between A sharp, B and C. From between A sharp and C, you have a diminished third, and that's not acceptable. Just like the other 2 cases of the D sharp and the G flat were not. So that doesn't give you anything useful, but I want to talk about some of those changes. If I go for it, first of all, Joe Satriani said that a human can only hear 11 notes at a time and make sense of all of them at the same time. We can't hear a chromatic scale and hear we can't hear a chromatic scale of 12 notes and hear it all at once and make sense of it at once. We can only hear 11 of those notes. Well, as far as the sharps goes, how many sharps can we handle before we lose it and can't hear it all? Well, that's an interesting question, I think. Since a natural scale, like say an A minor scale, A Aeolian mode, has 7 notes, it's safe to say you can only add 4 to those, which makes 11, because 7 plus 4 is 11, and still be able to hear all the changes. So the most you could hear from A Aeolian would be from A Aeolian all the way up into including A Lydian, because A Lydian has 4 sharps more than A Aeolian. So all the modes in between and F Lydian and A Aeolian are a major third apart. Major third is four major. A major third is 4 perfect fourths, and so we find that if you change the modes from one mode to a major third away, and make all those at the same time, you can hear all that. So that's like saying, I can hear A Aeolian, A Dorian, A Mixolydian, A Ionian, and A Lydian all at the same time, because that only makes 11 notes. But I can't hear 5 notes more sharp than an A a natural scale, because 5 notes sharp adds 5 notes to the 7 you already have, and 7 and 5 make 12, and we're not able to hear that. So that means that if I go back to E again, and if I have E Phrygian, and I go from E Phrygian to E Lydian, that's 5 sharps away, and I can't, and if that 5 sharps would give you, if I start on E, that would give you an E Phrygian. That's the first one. Then E Aeolian, E Dorian, E Mixolydian, E Ionian, and E Lydian. So that actually has 6 modes possible, but 5 steps from the original mode, and that would therefore that combination would have all 12 notes of a chromatic scale, and we can't hear that all at once. So another way of saying that is if you go 5 sharps, or from a minor mode. Another way of saying that is you get a mode and the same mode up or down a half step, and when you do that, you get all 12 tones. Let me explain that. So if I start in E Phrygian, I know I have E Phrygian, but E Phrygian is also F Lydian, so E Phrygian implies F Lydian. But then if I go from E Phrygian to E Lydian, I have now E Lydian. So what I have, if I go five perfect fifths, I have an E Lydian and an F Lydian, and E and F are half steps apart. So and since Lydian is the same mode, that is a scale, and then transpose up or down a half step. And that's too high of a modulation for us to handle all at once. So that means anytime we have a certain key and we go up or down a half step in that same key or mode or whatever, and combine the two, we can't make sense of all of that. That's too many notes. It's 12 notes. It's too many notes to make sense of. And so the major third is the outlying, as far as you can go, as far as modulations, and still hear it all at once. If you go to a half step, there's actually a major third. A major third and a perfect fifth make a major seventh, but a major seventh is a half step below the root, so it's still a half step, depending on if you look at it that way, which it is. A major third is a minor sixth, and a major seventh is a half step, just a minor second. That's just it. So you can always do four sharps or four flats away and get away with it as far as playing all the modes in between. But anyway, so I analyzed. So that was interesting to me. The most you could really do, you could go six sharps or flats, and that would go from Locrian to Lydian on the same mode. It would be like going from B. You could go from B Locrian to B Lydian. That would actually be 7 sharps, but that would still only be 12 notes, because you don't get more than 12 notes. You still only get 12. So but that's the most outlandish modulation you can do, is all the way from Lydian to Phrygian, because those are the extreme sharp and extreme flat mode of the major scale. That would involve, let's say, if you went from B in B Locrian, you have B and F, which is the finished fifth. But then if you have B Lydian, you would have B and E sharp, which is also still F. So you have a redundant note. You have an E sharp and an F, which would still be the same note. So you're not really adding any new information. You're not adding any more than 12 notes, because there aren't any more than 12 notes. So, and as long as this whole analysis went, you can also do the whole thing from sharp modes to flat modes as well. I just chose to go from the minor to the major. But if you can start with Ionian, so C Ionian mode, C major scale, C Ionian. The first flat would be B flat. That would give you C mixed Lydian. That's nothing new, because that's just another mode. Then if you do the B flat, and then it's the flat 7, and then flat the second. I mean, not the second, the third. You have B flat and E flat, and now you have C Dorian. Well, that's 2 flats away. And interestingly enough, if you take a C major scale and just take the last flat of that, which would be E flat, you have C major scale with an E flat, which is a C melodic minor scale, and that is a synthetic scale, but it still works in Western harmony. Then now I'm going to do 3 flats. I have B flat, that's the flat 7, E flat, that's the flat 3rd, and then A flat is the flat 6th. So if I did all 3 of those, I would have an E Aeolian mode. But if you take just the flat 6th, the last one, you would have an E major scale, or C major scale with a flatted 6. And that's an Ionian mode with a flatted 6, and that's a C harmonic major scale. So that's 3 flats away, and now you have a C harmonic major scale from that. And that's a C Ionian mode with an A flat. And yes, that does work. It's one of the Western scales. But any further than that, you run into the same thing I had with the sharps. If you go any further, after you flat the 6, if you flat the 6, 7, 8, no, it's 6, 7, 1, 2, you'd have to flat the second next. And that would be a D flat. And now you would have a C, if you did all those flats, you'd have a C Phrygian. that would be going from C Ionian to C Phrygian, and that you can still hear all those notes. That's only four flats away, so you could hear from C Ionian to C Phrygian and still hear all the notes, because you'd have E. I mean, not E. I keep saying E. C Ionian, C Mixolydian, C Dorian, C Aeolian, and C Phrygian. That would give you 11 notes, and you could hear all that at once. And again, the major third comes into play, because if you go from Ionian to Phrygian, that's from in white keys, that's from C Ionian to E Phrygian, and that's a major third away, just like it was between Aeolian and Lydian in the sharp ones. So you can hear all the modes between Ionian and Phrygian if it played all at once, because that makes 4 flats included, and plus you start with 7 notes, so 7 and 4 make 11, and you can, Joe Satriani says you can hear 11 notes. But if I flat more than that, you can run into trouble. If let's say I go from C, let's see, how would I do this? How about going from C Ionian to C Phrygian, C Ionian to C Phrygian. Yeah, wait. Yeah, I just did that. C Ionian to C Locrian. How about if I do that? C Ionian to C Locrian. Now that would give me the flat 7th, the flat 3rd, the flat 6th, the flat 2nd, and the flat 5th. So the flat 5th in C is G flat. So now I would have, and since that would be 5 flats, it would be all 12 notes, because 7 and 5 make 12. And the G, and you can tell that the G flat is dissonant within relation to C, because if you're in C major and you have a G flat, then that gives you E, F, and G flat, which again is 2 consecutive thirds, which gives you a diminished third between E and G flat, and that's not good. You can't have that in Western harmony. And then about the C Ionian to C Phrygian, I didn't discuss the note that goes with that. Sorry about that. If you're going from C Ionian to C Phrygian, the outlying note is the flat 2nd, or D flat. So the Ionian to C Phrygian. No, it isn't. That would be G flat. Yes. The outlying note between C Ionian and C Phrygian is D flat, because D flat's the 2nd, the flat 2nd in C, and D flat's not a useful note for Western harmony, because the D flat between the B, C, and D flat gives you 2 half steps in a row, which gives you a diminished third between B and D flat, and that's not acceptable. So the C Ionian to C Phrygian, you can hear all those notes, but that last flat, the G flat, can't be used to make a synthetic scale. And then, like I was saying, from the C Ionian to C Locrian, I have 5 flats, and that gives me 12 notes, which means I can't hear all of them at once. You can't hear 12 notes at once. And that last flat for that, which would be the flat of the C Locrian, would be G flat, and G flat's also not acceptable, because between E, F, and G flat, you have 2 half steps, which gives you a diminished third between E and G flat. E and G flat gives you a diminished third, and that's not acceptable for Western scales. So, except for that little blunder where I didn't say what note the C Phrygian implied and how that note was not acceptable for Western harmony, because you can't have the Phrygian note in C is D flat, and you can't have a D flat because for scales, because that's B, C, and D flat make a diminished third between B and D flat. If you can put that where I should have said it, I rolled it out pretty good there. That's all the theory I wanted to say. Whenever you are altering a scale to make an exotic scale or a synthetic scale, you always have to sharp or flat. That's the definition of an alteration. And usually you alter flat modes sharply, and you alter, like minor scales get sharped, and you alter sharp scales flatly. So major scales get flatted. And I just ran through the whole gamut of the whole deal. Oh, I forgot one more thing. I'm glad I kept rambling. You can tell when I went from the C Ionian to C Locrian, note this, that C. Locrian, see, first you started with C. Ionian, but C. Ionian is B. Locrian. So then I went from C. Ionian to C. Locrian, so I have B. Locrian to C. Locrian. That's the same mode up or down a half step, and that's also one way of knowing that it has all 12 notes and you can't use it. You can't hear all those notes at once in Western music, and just our ears can't do it. So just like in the minor case, I had the E Phrygian to the F Phrygian, which made a whole half step progression of the same mode. In the flatting case, I had B Locrian to C Locrian. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I had B Locrian to C Locrian. That's also more than we can hear, because that half step change makes all 12 notes of the correct scale. We can't hear all that. So I did that all right. Yeah. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the lesson. Love you guys. Keep loving rock and roll.